Good morning and welcome to this Chemistry World webinar. I'm Ben Valsler, Chemistry World's digital editor. You'll notice as well that I'm joined on screen by a BSL interpreter. Now, we know that some people in our audience do appreciate this function, and I should let you know that GoToWebinar allows you to move the webcam aspect around. So please do formulate GoToWebinar in the best way for you to make sure that you take full advantage of the interpretation. We're very, very lucky to have two interpreters with us today, Steve Churchill and Rachel Dance. They will be swapping between them, so the camera may move, but there will always be a BSL interpreter on screen for you. Just move those cameras around so you can make the best benefit of them. And I am absolutely honoured to be part of today's Commonwealth Chemistry launch and a discussion of addressing gender parity across the Commonwealth. To mark both International Women's Day and Commonwealth Day, we're going to explore ways to overcome the barriers that prevent women from fully participating in the chemical sciences. It is 2021, yes, but the retention and progression of women in the chemical sciences still remains imbalanced compared to that of their male peers. And this is compounded by an even deeper problem: cultural and educational barriers that rob many young girls and women of the opportunity to study chemistry and to follow a career in the chemical sciences. And that's why we thought this was an important topic, not just because it's both International Women's Day and Commonwealth Day, but it's also a key part of working together as a Commonwealth, as a network of nations, to try and achieve a better future for all chemical sciences and indeed all people throughout the Commonwealth. We have some fantastic guests with us today, and I'll introduce those in just a second. But first, just a couple of sort of little bits of housekeeping for you. We're using GoToWebinar as a platform. As I've said, you can move the cameras around to make sure that you get the best view that you want. There's not going to be a lot of presentation in this, but there will be a bit, but you may find that the webcams are the most interesting aspect. So feel free to move that screen around so you can see the people talking to you. Also, there is a questions box in the GoToWebinar panel, usually down at the bottom on the right-hand side. We're really interested to hear your experiences, your questions, your concerns about how we address gender parity across the Commonwealth. So please get any questions or comments that you have in at any point throughout the webinar. We've got plenty of time for Q&A after the presentation, so we really do want to hear from you. You are just as important to this presentation as all of our excellent speakers are. So please do contribute as much as you can, or as you would like to, or as you feel comfortable doing. I'm not going to use anybody's full name. If you'd like to remain anonymous, then that's absolutely fine. Do just get your questions in and we will make sure that we have opportunity to discuss them. The webinar is also being recorded, so if there's anything that you miss, or if you would like to come back and watch it again, then we will send you a link in a few days' time for the full recording of the webinar. For that reason, we also don't share any of the slides that are involved, because what's important is not just the words on the screen, but the things that people are saying. So we'll send a copy of that recording to you in a few days' time. Just keep an eye out on the email address that you use to register. So let me just introduce our 5 guests for today. Introducing Commonwealth Chemistry, we have two fantastic guests. Vicki Gardner is President-elect of Commonwealth Chemistry. She's the immediate past President of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute. She's a chartered chemist with experience in education, business development, organisational excellence, research and development, and stakeholder engagement, so across the board. She's held senior management positions in academia, government, SME, and industry not-for-profits. And Vicki will be joining us first. And then we have a message from Baroness Scotland of Asthall. She is the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland QC. She took office as the Secretary General of the Commonwealth in April 2016, and she serves the 54 governments and 2.4 billion people of the Commonwealth. She is actually the only woman since the post was created in the year 1315, and I did have to check that's not a typo, to be the Attorney General for England and Wales, and was also Attorney General for Northern Ireland. We're delighted that she has been able to make the time to send us a message for the launch of Commonwealth Chemistry. We're then going to move on to our discussion addressing gender parity across the Commonwealth, at which point we'll introduce Carol Mandel, who's International Science Envoy for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. She was appointed Chief Scientific Advisor at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as it was at the time, in October 2018, and she became International Science Envoy in January this year. She's a Professor of Intergalactic Astronomy, Head of Astrophysics at the University of Bath, and a Fellow of the Institute of Physics. She will be followed by Gloria Abuzo, who is a Professor of Chemistry from the University of Port Harcourt, and she became the first female president of the Chemical Society of Nigeria in the 37 years of its existence back in 2014. She's a Vice President of the Federation of African Societies of Chemistry and a member of international and national chemical societies. Delighted to have Gloria with us. And last but not least on the panel is Sarah Overington, as Director for Science Promotions and Operations at NSERC, that's the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. She will be bringing to a close the discussion of gender parity, after which we go to your Q&A. As I've already mentioned, Rachel and Steve will be doing BSL interpretation throughout. Really delighted to have them with us. If this is something that you benefit from, please let us know either in the questions here or in the comments on the feedback form afterwards, because we want to make sure that our online events are as accessible as possible to as wide an audience as possible. So please let us know if there's anything else that we could do as well to help make these more engaging and more accessible for you. So that's quite enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Vicki now. So we should be able to get Vicki on screen and hear her as well. So once again, Vicki is President-elect of Commonwealth Chemistry. Thank you for joining us, Vicki. I appreciate time zones have made this a difficult thing to arrange. So it's really good to see you with us. Thank you ever so much. And I shall hand over and let you take it away.
Thank you, Ben, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to celebrate the formal launch of the Federation of Commonwealth Chemical Science Societies, known as Commonwealth Chemistry. My name is Vicki Gardner, and I have the honour of being the first President-elect of Commonwealth Chemistry. We will soon begin our first live discussion event in association with Chemistry World on the subject of addressing gender parity across the Commonwealth. But first, I'd like to introduce Commonwealth Chemistry and also introduce a welcome message from our special guest. While I'm truly delighted to welcome you, as many of you, to our virtual event today, this is not exactly how we envisaged our formal launch, when in 2018, representatives from 30 Commonwealth nations gathered to discuss the value of forming a federation of chemical societies. After much collaborative effort, we decided a date in May 2020 for the first Commonwealth Chemistry Congress and General Assembly. But as you'll know, sadly we had to postpone, but we still welcomed hundreds of delegates from 40 countries to participate in a hugely fulfilling online poster event. And buoyed by the success of that virtual event, we're all looking very much forward to the virtual Congress and General Assembly meeting that we'll be holding later this year. We're soon opening registrations, so please do look out for more news about it. Our vision for Commonwealth Chemistry is one of unity and fairness. One community, one voice, catalysing equality for all. And in so many ways, the events of 2020 highlighted the fundamental importance of that vision. Equality in healthcare, equality in justice, and equality of opportunities for all people all around the world. And Commonwealth Chemistry has started this journey with an inclusive and equal voice from all continents of the globe, with 10 countries represented on its executive board. So how can we help as Commonwealth Chemistry? Well, we're here to inspire, celebrate, and elevate the role and practice of the chemical sciences for the benefit of the Commonwealth nations and their people. The Commonwealth itself is a unique institution with a powerful voice, and so it's my enormous pleasure to begin our event today by introducing this special welcome message from Baroness Scotland, Secretary-General of the Commonwealth of Nations.
Greetings, everyone. It is an immense pleasure on behalf of the wider Commonwealth family to be participating in your launch of the Commonwealth Chemistry. The people and institutions of the Commonwealth connect in many ways and cooperate through multiple networks. It is wonderful to welcome Commonwealth Chemistry as a fresh and imaginative expression of the mutual support and encouragement which flourish in and amongst our member nations. Your institutional and personal connections build on bonds made and cemented over many years through academic and other contacts and nurtured by the chemical science societies. Collectively, Commonwealth Chemistry will play an important role in advancing chemistry as a science, developing its applications and disseminating chemical knowledge, especially by identifying areas where these are most needed. As we approach 2030, the target date for the Sustainable Development Agenda, and particularly following the social and economic ravages of the pandemic, we need to redouble our efforts in every field of endeavour and work together, pooling talent and technical expertise towards a common future which will be fairer, more inclusive, more sustainable, and more secure for all. Chemistry is essential for meeting our basic needs of food, clothing, shelter, health, and energy, and for maintaining the healthy air, water, and soil on which the life of our planet depends. Chemical technologies have enriched our quality of life in so many ways throughout human history by providing solutions to problems in health, materials, and energy use. We want to see more of our young people, particularly our young girls, studying chemistry in our schools and universities. This is necessary to prepare our young people for making their contribution to the innumerable ways in which the expertise of chemical scientists continue to improve our health, our environment, and our daily lives. The need for innovation, high productivity, and prosperity in all our member nations requires us to invest more in science and technology. The impressive record and continuing rising trajectory of Commonwealth collaboration shines as a beacon for multilateral cooperation. So too does this commendable and most encouraging coming together in a new federation of more than 30 chemistry societies. Connecting Commonwealth scientists with each other in this way, and with wider society, opens up new horizons of hope that creative solutions will be found to some of the most pressing issues of our day. We need our scientists to have every opportunity to do their best work and to make discoveries, so that through inventiveness and innovation, we are able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and targets. The vision of the Commonwealth Chemistry as a community and catalyst for change, capable of being the collective voice of the professional institutions and people it represents, aligns with the values and principles of our Commonwealth Charter. So I wish you every success and welcome your commitment to serving the nations of the Commonwealth in this way. And so thank you. Thank you.
Many thanks to Baroness Scotland and to Vicki Gardner there. Now, as was intimated there, gender equality is one of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and these are pressing challenges that require urgent global action by 2030, which is coming up far sooner than you might think. And so today's discussion, we're going to look at perspectives on gender issues throughout the Commonwealth and the cultural challenges to attract and retain women in the chemical sciences. We'll look at gender inequality and its consequences in research culture, including gender bias in publishing, and we'll look at policies on integrating diversity and gender equality from the perspective of a funding agency. And to pick us up with that topic, delighted to have Carol Mandel with us. Now, Carol joined us last year for one of our inclusion and diversity webinar series, which you can find at chemistryworld.com/webinars. And we could not wait for the opportunity to invite her back to join us to discuss another incredibly important topic for every chemical scientist working today. Carol was appointed Chief Scientific Advisor at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in October 2018. Now, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is now the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and Carol's role is now International Science Envoy. There's a bit more of a bio on screen, but we're also delighted to have Carol on screen with us now. Thank you for joining us again, Carol. I'll leave it to you to take it away.
Thank you, Ben. It's a great pleasure to join you today, and congratulations to everyone online for the Federation that we're celebrating today. I think it's a fantastic initiative, and happy International Women's Day, of course, to you all around the world. What I'd like to do in my 10 minutes now is just to give you a sense of both the challenge and the opportunity that faces us. I think international collaboration is the most important thing that we can think of to do. I am an international scientist and also an international science diplomat, and I collaborate with colleagues around the world. Science, of course, does not know boundaries, and global challenges don't know boundaries either. And so we must work together to solve the biggest global challenges that face us as a planet. To name two of these, of course, climate change and global health are very much at the forefront of our minds. The UK this year will hold COP26 in November, and we will bring together nations from around the world to really pledge to some very, very ambitious targets to tackle the global climate crisis that we're facing. And of course, the countries that will reap the damage and are currently feeling the impact of global climate change are not necessarily the countries that make the biggest contributions to the carbon budget. And I see your communities across Commonwealth Chemistry as having some of the key knowledge and innovations to be able to help us to tackle that. To address the Sustainable Development Goals more broadly, again, this is international and cannot be the preserve of just one nation. The impacts are felt around the world of the current coronavirus. We've seen this pandemic and how it's affected different nations differently. But the one thing that has struck me that has been common across all nations is the disproportionate impact on our women and our girls. And however that manifests in your country, really the pandemic has shone a very harsh light on inequality in all of our countries. And so I think here we have an opportunity to take the learning from this pandemic and to really look at how we reshape our societies, our civil societies, our structures, our systems, and how we learn from one another internationally. So it's very exciting to see your federation launch today and to really put collaboration at the heart of everything that we do. At the heart of this must also be diversity, and each of your countries will tackle this in a different way. I think this Commonwealth Chemistry Federation is a real instrument for change. You're able to connect with one another, share best practice, and also reach out to one another in times of challenge. The Royal Society of Chemistry has some wonderful resources for you to tap into. Two reports that stood out to me was their Breaking the Barriers report, which talks about toxic workplace cultures and particularly sexual harassment and other kinds of bullying in the workplace. And also the second report was gender bias in publishing. And when we think about our research cultures and we think about how we celebrate success and how we recognize success, of course, peer-reviewed publication is the gold standard for how we communicate our research results and also how we reward success and achievement. So gender bias is really threaded through everything that we're looking at. To fix that gender bias and to really move to a place of equity is vitally important. The reason for this is, of course, that we need all of the talent in the room. It's not just the right thing to do, but it also makes incredibly good business sense. And if we have to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing our species on our planet, we don't want to lock half of the talent out of the room. And this is why it's particularly important today for us to be having this conversation with the eminent women that you'll hear from after me, that we need to have practical steps in place to make sure that not only are we helping and encouraging young children to see the excitement in science, but also for them to be able to see a path ahead for them, they and their parents and their families and their communities, that those young girls and women coming into science, if they have the opportunity to come in, must also have the opportunity to progress and develop in their careers and contribute to these wider challenges. And the way I think of this is, if we are successful at bringing young women and girls into the corridor of science, the last thing we want to do is encourage them to walk up that corridor and then find that the door is slammed in their face at the other end. And so it's for all of us really to look along that pipeline and see where are the barriers. Some of these are structural barriers. These will be deeply ingrained power structures that will have been there for many, many generations. In my own field of physics, this is traditionally a very white, male-dominated field. And even today in the 21st century, I hear young male colleagues saying that women can't do science, women are not clever enough for physics, or women don't want to do science and physics. And all of these comments, of course, are completely false and wrong. We need to change the attitudes towards our sciences, and we also have to show that there are successful women of all kinds at the top. Those role models are incredibly important, but so is the pipeline and the path to get there. And so the women that you'll hear from today and the discussion that we'll have after we've given our presentations, hopefully will give you a very diverse picture of some of the opportunities and the challenges. We need to connect with our youngest girls and our junior women. We need to help and support them, whilst we, as senior women, are removing the barriers around us and behind us. And the other thing that I think your network is so incredibly important for is for supporting your senior women. Because when you blaze a trail, it can be a lonely place to be. And it's incredibly important that we can connect with one another to support one another as we remove and tackle those barriers. So finally, I'd like to just wish you all the best for the launch of your federation. I can't say strongly enough how very excited I am and how very important it is, and also how to move the public perception of chemistry as the industrial revolution, dirty, male-dominated kind of subject, that it's not a girl's subject. I think you've done so well to move that dial on, and everything that I see in international science and science diplomacy has chemistry embedded through it. Some of the most innovative technologies, the way we're tackling this global pandemic, all of this has chemistry right at the heart of it. So I'm very excited and very honoured to be with you today, and really looking forward to helping move the barriers for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. Carol will be sticking with us for the Q&A at the end here as well. So if you have any questions for Carol, any comments, if you'd like to talk about your own experience as a woman in chemistry, then do get those questions into the bottom of the GoToWebinar panel. You'll see there's a box there for asking questions to our audience. Thank you, Carol. We'll let you enjoy the rest of the presentations. We'll pick you up again for the Q&A. And speaking of the rest of the presentations, our next guest, we're delighted to have Gloria Abuzor with us, who is a professor of chemistry from the University of Port Harcourt and the former president of the Nigeria Chemical Society. In fact, the first female president of the Chemical Society of Nigeria in its first 37 years of existence, breaking her own barriers there. So let's see if we can get Gloria on screen, and Gloria also has a presentation for us. Again, if you are relying on the BSL interpretation, that will remain on screen, and you can move the cameras to be where you want, in addition to seeing the slides that Gloria will be sharing for us. So there's Gloria's slides. Let's see if we can hear and see Gloria as well. Hi, Gloria. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be addressing gender parity across the Commonwealth, and I'll be addressing gender parity. Gender parity itself, we're told just a number that's Gender parity is a statistical measure used to describe ratios between males and females in a given population. And the United Nations, in its Declaration of Human Rights, specifies that all women, men and women, have equal opportunities. And also, the United Nations is one of the political bodies that says explicitly that gender parity at all levels is a goal that it must achieve. And it does this by seeing to it that it identifies gender parity and tracks gender balance in the following areas: leadership and accountability, management and hiring and retention, and quality and social experience of men and women. Well, in Nigeria being one of the 54 countries of the Commonwealth, Nigeria today has a population of about 200.69 million. And our female population amounted to approximately 99.13 million, while male population amounted to approximately 101.83 million inhabitants. Currently, we have 102.7 males per 100 males in Nigeria in 2020. And this is growing at an average rate of 23%. God gave us gender parity that is almost 1-to-1. Now, in education in Nigeria, there is gender parity at the crèche, daycare centers, primary schools, and secondary schools. However, there is a slight variation. University level, in the study of chemistry, we have more females in majority of the universities. And this is brought about by a sensitization of the Chemical Society of Nigeria through its Women in Chemistry, where they hold workshops. And they adopt secondary schools as they hold the workshops. They hold workshops in secondary schools, sensitizing the girl child to study chemistry. And when these secondary school girls see these ladies, grown-ups, having discussions with them, having lunch with them, and they see them as their role model, and they are mentoring the students, that gives them the flair, the joy, the zeal to study chemistry. And when we have global women's breakfast events, which was introduced by IUPAC about for four years ago, and we go the Women in Chemistry groups, divisions of Chemical Society of Nigeria, go to these secondary schools and have breakfast with them. It encouraged the girls to now study chemistry at the university level. However, once they're at the university level, we still encourage them. But on graduation, we have shortage of early career chemists. There are lots of problems in securing job. The rate of unemployment in Nigeria, which is common in most Commonwealth countries, Africa in general, or the world as a whole, the unemployment is so high that most graduates cannot find job. Bearing in mind that in Nigeria, about 80% of students are sponsored by their parents from crèche, primary, secondary, and university level. Once they finish, they are starting to work. When they don't have the job, we find only about 20% that are self-sponsoring. When they can't find a job, the majority of the parents cannot afford to send back their children to go and do postgraduate work. And we find most of the people either doing some other soft jobs, probably doing some fashion designing, do some good work at the open schools, struggle at open schools. Some are into buying and selling, while some that are employed. Some are employed. Then there's lack of funding for further education. Hence, they cannot go any further. Then there's also the cultural barrier. That's, see, in Nigeria, there are two major religions that play key roles in the way most people live their lives. In the northern zone, it's Islam, while the southern zone is basically Christians. With Islamic culture, they have a standard way of control that the girl child obeys the culture, that most of them do not work after graduation. While in the southern part, majority may work, but since there's no job and there's no funding, most of the girls get married. And when you don't have employment, most people, their husband tells them to stay at home and raise kids and watch after the home. And that is a big challenge. It's a big challenge because they cannot go further. And with that, we do not have lots of early career chemists as there is the need to be. Then those that get married, probably after 5, 10 years, they now go back to school with a struggle, and by struggling and going back to school. At that point, they are beyond 45 years of age. And by the time they finish to get their PhD, the rest is a story that you could say they are well over the top. There's also the lack of established research centers or laboratories. And even those that can afford to go back to school. Theoretically, our products, our students are very, very sound. But in terms of skills, hands-on, there's difficulty because we don't have the standard laboratories where they can compare favorably with international standards immediately to compete for some grants, to use the state-of-the-art equipment. It's an issue. And what is the implication of this? Then those that are actually now employed at in any establishment, you find that the male to female ratio, there's no more parity. The parity that we had, or the over parity that we had on entering the university becomes skewed. For example, the male have more males than females in most chemistry departments of almost all the universities. We'll have more males in most of companies. The ratio that we have is such that it's alarming. Take, for example, the University of Port Harcourt, where I work. We have 31 males to 8 females. University of Uyo have 22 males to 7 females. Federal University of Agriculture, Makurdi, have 23 males to 12 females. University of Calabar, we have 30 males to 12 females. River State University have 8 males to 7 females. Then Ignatius Ajuru University have 9 males to 5 females. University of Nigeria and Soka have 24 males to 12 males. This is the ratio that you can find in most chemistry departments, and even in companies. The companies, the oil-based companies are worst, where you may not find some females at all. That's the implication that we have. Now, the mitigation of this, I like what Baroness Scotland has said. There's the need for us to support each other. And there's the need for us to have collaboration. There's the need for us to have a launching pad where we have, now that we have this Federation of Commonwealth Chemical Societies, where we can reach out and support those countries, not just Nigeria. Nigeria is only a case study. This could be the same that is happening to the majority of other Commonwealth countries, where we can have job creation, and also have special funding by external bodies that will support countries that don't have established labs, or where they don't have enough earlier career chemists because of not having employment, then the Chemical Society of Nigeria and any other chemical society should establish a counseling unit with partnership with universities, such that the girl child at university will be cancelled. But they should not. They should try, they should be encouraged not to accept staying at home after getting married, in as much as their husband will pay them salaries commensurate to what a job earner is earning. They should be able to express themselves. That after having spent 4 to 6 years to graduate, there is the need for them to practice what they have studied. If this is done, the issue of non-parity will be removed. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sticking around for the Q&A session coming up as well. That was a focus on Nigeria, certainly, but we can't pretend that these are issues only in Africa or only in the developing world. The leaky pipeline is very true across the Commonwealth, realistically across the entire world. In fact, Devashish has sent a message saying very, very similar in India as well. The pipeline to a career in chemistry for women in India is similarly challenging as in Nigeria and also in the rest of the world. Now, our last guest before we go to Q&A is Sarah Overington. She's Director of Science Promotions and Operations at the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. Sarah, thank you for joining us. Clearly, we've already had some very important topics brought up, and I'm sure you will have more to add to that as well. So once again, no presentation, so those that need to can focus on Rachel Dance doing her BSL, but I will hand over to Sarah now and come back to you for Q&A after Sarah's presentation.
Thanks very much, Ben. Hello, everyone. Good morning from Ottawa, Canada. It's really a pleasure to be part of this discussion today. And on behalf of my organization, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Council of Canada, NSERC, I'd like to congratulate you on the launch of Commonwealth Chemistry, and I look forward to continued interactions. Today, I'll be bringing a perspective on the role that organizations supporting science and research can play in gender equity. Just to give an introduction, NSERC is one of 3 federal funding agencies for scientific research in Canada. We provide grants and scholarships to students and researchers across the range of natural sciences and engineering disciplines, including the chemical sciences. And our annual budget is over 1 billion Canadian dollars. So I'll be speaking about some of the approaches we as a funding agency have used, and I hope that these points are relevant to other groups. I look forward to the discussion and sharing ideas. Also wanted to start by saying, as a woman in science, I was very privileged to be supported first by my family, and then throughout my research training by great advisors and mentors, and finding ways to build supports like these into our research and training programs across the country is something very important to me. As in many countries, women are underrepresented in the chemical sciences in Canada, and I'll add some complementary numbers to those that Gloria presented. At NSERC, our largest program, the Discovery Grants Program, provides foundational support for more than 10,000 researchers at universities across the country. So this is funding faculty researchers. And of the applications in 2020, only 17% of applicants in chemistry identified as women. This is below the already very low percentage of 22% women across all of the disciplines we fund. The success rates in these competitions are typically very close for women and men. Women do well in getting grants. And although this doesn't mean our grant programs are free of bias, it does tell us that our key issue is really in the composition of the research community, that is in who is applying, and the faculty breakdown across the country. I also wanted to mention that although our focus of discussion today and what I'll be talking about is gender parity, we really recognize that diversity is lacking along many dimensions, including beyond binary gender, and there are systemic issues that affect groups in different and intersecting ways. As a funding agency in Canada, we don't have a direct influence on education, on student enrollment and training, or on hiring of researchers, but we do hear from the research community that our actions have a big influence. So I'm going to just start by describing some of our approaches across programs, and then I will share a few examples of specific funding programs that focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So a first step is establishing the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion in our work as an organization. This includes public statements and action plans with specific commitments, and it really requires engagement from people in our organization at all levels to reflect these commitments and values. And clear communication of these messages is very important, but is certainly not sufficient to make change. But by having clear requirements in our programs is where we can really influence behavior and practices. For example, a focus in many programs, and as Carol mentioned, is really how we assess impact and research excellence of an individual or team. And so as a funding agency, and as we provide guidance, we can ask questions about what is excellence, what is impact, do traditional definitions reinforce inequities? We know that diversity is needed to do the best science with the highest impact. And when we ask peer reviewers to think broadly about excellence and to avoid the use of publication metrics, we need to explain why these are not useful measures. For example, if bibliometric research has shown that women and men have different citation behaviors, then relying on these introduces additional bias into our processes. When we're assessing excellence, we also need to ensure that criteria of excellence and achievement consistently take into account delays in research activities, for example, due to maternity and parental leave, and we need to have good systems in place to do this across all applicants. And we need to continue to listen and learn and adapt. So in 2020, NSERC published new guidelines to recognize the differential impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on researchers and students, and to guide applicants and reviewers on how to be sure they took an equitable approach to considering these issues when reviewing applications. We have a long way to go in changing how research excellence is assessed. These are deep cultural changes, but we can commit to these conversations and to exploring how to be part of positive change. Our grants are often used to fund students and other personnel. And so an area we can have big impact is in requiring applicants to talk about how they will develop inclusive practices in their research training. And over the course of several years, the discussion on this topic has really deepened. The expectations from our peer reviewers has increased, and this builds knowledge throughout the research community. These requirements really do have an impact on all of those who participate in our peer review processes, both applicants and reviewers, and it can change the research training environment in important ways. I think the conversation matters. Inclusive practices during events and during peer review meetings can have an impact that goes far beyond the meetings themselves. So staff and reviewers need training to understand their own biases and how to reflect on these. We really strive to have diverse peer review panels, and asking peer reviewers to use gender-neutral language when they're talking about applicants can also send a powerful message. This can be a challenge in many languages. In Canada, this is much more challenging in French than in English. But more important than avoiding the use of particular pronouns is really the discussion that this prompts amongst a peer review panel in recognizing bias. Overall, the goal is really to have everyone questioning their assumptions and to build a better and a more fair system. We also have a number of supporting policies in place to ensure that we're supporting researchers, often in these cases women, at critical points in their lives and careers. As a funding agency, we provide 1 year of paid parental leave for students supported through scholarships and fellowships, or who are paid by researchers through our grants. We also extend many of our grants with funding during periods of maternity, parental, or medical leave. And these policies not only provide support, but really send a message about the way these activities are valued. These are some examples of the approaches, and there are many more. I would encourage you to look at NSERC's webpage, where you'll find links to the work we're doing and also to other funding agencies in Canada. Before I end, I want to mention a few programs that we have that aim to foster a more diverse scientific community. I'll describe a few of them today. I think we'll share some links in the chat as well. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you'd like to hear more. The first I'll mention is the Dimensions program. And this program aims to foster transformational change within the research community at Canadian post-secondary institutions by identifying and eliminating obstacles and inequities. The design of Dimensions was informed by efforts in other countries, programs such as Athena Swan in the UK and Ireland, SAGE in Australia, and Sea Change in the US. And the name of the program, Dimensions, recognizes the multiplicity of perspectives, lived experiences, and the overall complexity of diverse individuals, fostering increased research excellence, innovation, and creativity. There are 17 institutions across Canada who are currently participating in this pilot program that was launched in 2019. During the pilot stage, data must be collected and analyzed, and an in-depth assessment of the institution's systems, practices, and culture is carried out. And this is all to develop an action plan. Part of this pilot is also a commitment to share practices. And so I would encourage you also to take a look there, because as they develop new tools and practices, they will be sharing them. A long-standing program we also have at NSERC is our Chairs for Women in Science and Engineering. And this program supports 5 women across the country who are recognized for their excellence in research and who commit to spending half of their time on activities to raise the level and participation of women in science and engineering. The program was first launched as a Women in Engineering chair in 1989, and the program is regional. So there's one chair for each of the Atlantic, Quebec, Ontario, Prairies, and British Columbia, Yukon regions. So these span really coast to coast to coast in Canada, and they cover large areas. The goal of the program, and just to speak to the importance of role models that was mentioned before, it's really to provide role models who are accomplished, successful, recognized researchers in science and engineering. And they also work together to develop and implement communication and networking strategy to ensure regional and national impact on opportunities for women in science and engineering. I've focused a lot on university and college programs, but we know that career paths are often decided much earlier in life. So I'll finish by mentioning NSERC's Promo Science program. And this is a program that offers financial support to organizations working with young Canadians to promote an understanding of science and engineering. This program supports an amazing range of hands-on learning experiences for young students and their teachers. And the program encourages initiatives that promote science and engineering to all young people, and especially to adapt those approaches to ensure that underrepresented and disadvantaged groups are included, including girls and Indigenous peoples in Canada. This is part of a suite of science promotion programs that aim to increase communication and eliminate barriers for many young people face when entering the sciences. Organizations find ways to make science accessible, and these activities can really have a life-changing impact. It's a wonderful program to be involved with, and there are a lot of great links on our website if you're interested. As a federal government organization, it's really our responsibility to ensure that research is done for the benefit of all. And we know that with the broadest participation, we have a better chance of doing this and achieving this goal. So through our policies and programs, the goal is to accelerate and support change in the research community and to be part of these conversations and increased expectations. Thanks again very much for the opportunity to join the panel today. I look forward to questions, and please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I really enjoy discussing these issues, and I'm happy to connect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for joining with us. And do stay with us because we are going into the Q&A now. We have about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. In fact, no, we've got a bit more than that because this is a 90-minute webinar. So we're used to doing 1 hour. So that's great. And we have had a lot of really good questions from the audience. Do keep them coming, though. There's still plenty of time to get them through. One thing that has come up a couple of times on the registration form as well as in the questions now. How do we ensure, so Catherine asked this, we also had a couple of other people asking something very similar. How do we ensure that governments across the Commonwealth commit to implementing gender equity in chemical sciences for both men and women? Let's see, Carol, let's start with you, and we'll see if we can get Gloria back up as well for a Nigerian perspective. Carol, what do you think? How do we make our governments commit to real measurable steps?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I think that the first thing to note really is helping governments who may be not in that mindset understand both the business and the ethical imperative for this. And also how it will help them to deliver on their objectives. I mean, we see obviously along the axis of prosperity to security, that's the sort of thing that nation governments care about. They care about their electorate, they care about how to make their countries successful and safe. And of course, we need to show how we can help enable them to do that. And I think when we have these really challenging questions, we know that if we have a monoculture, so one type of person in the room, whether that's same socioeconomic background, the same gender, the same culture, the same lived experience, and we ask a complex question, the answer is always going to be wrong for mostly everybody else. So I think governments don't want to come up with the wrong answers for most of their people. And this, I think, is going to become increasingly important as technology starts to become even more rapidly complex. So I'm thinking, in the field, for example, of artificial intelligence, we can't afford to have single monocultures designing those sorts of systems because they are going to be wrong for everybody. And we've seen that very much in some of the gender biased algorithms that come out with all sorts of unintended consequences. And it's governments who will then have to pick up the pieces of those unintended consequences. So I think the pace of change in technology across the whole of science and engineering and innovation is unprecedented. It has to be to tackle our global challenges, but also, that science will run away with us, and governments are therefore, they are in the position to set the policy frameworks to help us to do that safely. For me, science is always dual process. It's always two sides to it. It can be used for good, it can be used for ill. And it's governments that manage the policy frameworks. But of course, they don't always have the scientific expertise to do that across the breadth and the depth that they need to. So they need to have the most diverse communities. They need to be able to connect with those diverse communities. And as we've seen through this pandemic, putting the best and highest quality science, evidence and advice at the heart of policy making is really important, ultimately, for saving life in our countries. So it's too important for governments not to take seriously, and we can educate them both practically how to do this and also that it has to be done. And I think, the UK government has put significant money on the table to deliver on equality, diversity and inclusion objectives. But of course, they need all of the ecosystems of our universities, of our businesses, of our innovation pipelines and our public sector to be structured and to be operationalized in the right way to be able to really fulfill on the potential of that funding. And I think, some of the great initiatives that Sarah's described, we're learning from Canada how to do this. We launched Athena Swan. We're learning all the time from when Athena Swan worked. It's evolved. I mean, these were, eminent women who had got to a point in their career, the likes of Dame Sally Davis, who was our chief medical officer, and Professor Dame Jocelyn Bell, who discovered pulsars, the densest form of material in the universe. And these were women who blazed their trail, who were alone in their field, who were incredibly strong, and they said change has to happen and we're going to make it happen. And then I've benefited from that as a woman coming through my career, but also I'm seeing the barriers, so the extra workload, that it was women who were doing the culture work in departments. It was women who were doing the Athena Swan paperwork so that their organizations could benefit from winning these awards. So again, we're coming back, we're reassessing that, we're doing lessons learned, and we're saying how can we improve this to continue to drive change across all sorts of intersection, across race, gender, lived experience, socioeconomic background. And connecting internationally for me is the key in learning from one another, sharing best practice, and that will help to accelerate that for countries who want to learn from those who are slightly ahead.
Sarah, clearly you are ahead of us in Canada, and you seem to be doing very well with this. But how do we convince a government to prioritise this? What do we need to do to make sure that it is actually, you know, on a piece of paper in front of them and they are making decisions and taking positive actions?
Yeah, that's a big question, and thanks, Carol, for the mentioning Athena Swan. I think with the Dimensions program, we have tried to build, and that has been learned a lot from other countries and how to move ahead. I mean, there are many parts to this. I think some of it is really based on, and we talked about it a little bit, is making that case for why diversity is important. Beyond just the ethical and moral case that we know is really important, but there is now such strong evidence that really this leads to better outcomes, and I think continuing to bring that forward is something that's hard to argue against, and building that evidence base is really valuable. But then I think ultimately it takes individuals in senior leadership roles in organizations, in government, to be willing to then move ahead and take action, and sometimes have uncomfortable conversations and make decisions that can be challenging, recognizing the value of that. And I think very visible decisions can make a big difference. For us in Canada, a number of years ago, with the election of our current government, there was a commitment to having gender parity in cabinet, and that was a very visible change. That meant that there were many more women, and very highly qualified women, in senior roles. It was a very visible and powerful message, and it has had an impact throughout the country and throughout all government organizations. And so for me, working in a federal organization, we certainly saw the impact of those kinds of actions. So those are a few, I think. I mean, there's deep work to be done throughout, but I think a commitment at all levels is really needed.
Gloria, it would be lovely to have a Nigerian perspective on this. How can we make governments make those positive steps?
It's possible to have governments make these positive steps if for the people at all the helms of affairs are mandated through United Nations and UNESCO to say that there has to be a policy statement which the world body will insist on, probably attach incentives to say, if you are able to establish this department and have it functional, that you have gender parity, that you have support for early career chemists, early career or scientists, that you have support for females, then they are likely to take it seriously. But if it's only a statement without incentive, that is not, there's no sort of reward attached to it, they may not be taken serious. As the reward is attached to it and is given a time frame, say within 10 years this needs to be done, and if you are able to give to support female scientists across the board, that when you apply for this grant or you apply for this, it will be given. The case in point in Nigeria, the budget for education is very, very small, very, very low. And for over 10 years, people have been talking about it, but nothing is done because there's no penalty for not having the budget commensurate with the level of people in schools. And if you want to have anything done, there should be some sort of incentive and also penalty for failure to do so. We know that one of the Sustainable Development Goals says that there should be gender equality, freedom to study, freedom to live, freedom to do whatever as a male or female. For parity, which we need to have, that whatever the male is doing, that the number should be the same ratio. Government needs to be made in a way that is a policy statement, because the issue in Nigeria is not only in Nigeria, it's across the board, Africa and majority of the Commonwealth countries.
So it sounds like you're saying that essentially we should put our money where our mouth is, and it is great to convince governments that there are practical, and the evidence is out there, this is not controversial, there are practical benefits to having a more diverse workforce, to having and that's in terms of gender and every other aspect of diversity. And now we need to almost enforce that diversity by some sort of financial or otherwise benefit to ensuring, and everybody should be on side with that, because we've got the evidence that shows that you get positive outcomes from having a diverse workplace. I guess one thing, Carol, let's come back to you first with this. What's your position about equity rather than equality? And there is, of course, a difference in terms of sort of equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome and so on. How do you position yourself with that?
So I think that's a really interesting question, Ben, and I've thought a lot about this through my career, and I've actually started to change my mind. So this is my personal opinion. And I agree very much with Gloria. There's been much discussion about quotas, and it's quite a controversial thing. You know, there's been this sense that, well, if we get all of the equality of opportunity right, then gradually things will naturally change. And to be honest, I haven't seen that in my career. I haven't seen it happen fast enough. And I think, you know, the current state, or actually before the pandemic, it may be worse now, but models showed that in order to close the global gender pay gap at current pace would take 175 years. That's too slow, right? And I imagine it's even slower now given the pandemic crisis. So actually, you know, Gloria is right that if you start with that top-down quota, lots of disagreement about, you know, whether that's the right thing to do. The evidence shows that that has a really dramatic effect within one generation. You define it, you give a time frame for that to be achieved, and then it suddenly starts to trickle down throughout all of your systems. And it also, you know, I know myself when I look at, for example, a panel and it's, you know, with respect, it's all older white men, and I just think that's not a place for me. They're not speaking to me. I don't feel represented there. And as a consequence, I won't necessarily be tuned into what that panel's going to say either, because I'll think, well, they haven't had my lived experience. And so I think, you know, there are countries, and particularly in the financial sector now, the big global corporations are realizing that they are missing all of that talent. And so they need to have parity on their boards. And then they need to say to their organizations, we need this parity throughout. What you then achieve by doing that is you start to find the really stubborn blocks in your system, because then people start saying, well, I can't deliver that. I've been tasked and targeted, and it will be measured on my ability to achieve that within my realm or my team, but I'm not able to do that because, for example, there's no diverse talent to pull from. And you start to push that all the way down through the pipeline, and you start to find out where the bits that are broken and where to target your efforts to remove those barriers. The bits that move quickly, great, you are probably already there, nearly there. The bits that don't move at all are the bits that will actually break all your objectives from the top down. So start there and then see where your system isn't working. I think that's a really powerful way to do that, be it within an organization, a country, or, you know, a global system.
Thank you. Sarah has pointed out in the questions as well that I simplified that down to a financial benefit, but Gloria may well have also meant awards, recognition, other non-financial ways of encouraging and rewarding people in those sorts of positions. Thank you, Sarah, for calling me up on that. So you mentioned the pandemic there. We've had a couple of comments here, and there was an excellent post earlier on Twitter. Have a look on the International Women's Day hashtag, and Professor Dave Smith, who is at Professor_Dave, longtime friend and collaborator with Chemistry World, posted a graphic that showed that in working researcher couples, since the pandemic started, everybody spends less time commuting and that sort of thing, and possibly a bit of less time doing work. But women dramatically exceed men in the amount of extra time they now spend on household chores and childcare since the pandemic. These are otherwise equal couples, both researchers, now working from home because of the pandemic, and yet women are being encouraged or feeling no choice but to fall back into traditional caring and housekeeping roles. You would hope the pandemic would have been an opportunity to press reset on some of this. What do you think we need to do to be able to get around that, not just get more women in the workplace, but actually see a fairer balance of work-life balance and actually the roles that women are expected to perform. Sarah, let's go to you for this one. I don't know if you've seen similar things over in Canada. I think Dave's results that he's showing are from a British survey. How do you think we can change the culture around this as well to make the opportunities for women not just there is a job for you, but also your responsibilities are equal to that of a man's?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have seen the same in Canada, and something we've been thinking about. This is not really how to make a change, but just in response to that, we did, as I mentioned, some of these guidelines around just to recognize that there have been differential impacts and to allow people to describe those so that they can be taken into account when, in our case, when people are applying for research grants. When it comes to actually changing the balance of workload, I mean, this is a societal and a fairly deep issue. And I think a big part of that is really changing expectations more broadly. It's not a women's issue. And I think, these are parts of work and life that need to be supported. And I think having systems in place that allow partners and others to take on those tasks and for women to feel supported is what's going to be key for that. So I think, for us, I think things like encouraging partners to take parental leave and not having those policies really focused only on mothers or on women, and thinking more broadly in that sense is important. And then I think having those policies in place to allow research continuation and paid leaves are also really important at that point too. And I think those kinds of policies coming from a funding organization. So yeah, in our case, I think it's really having those issues articulated so that individuals in the system can understand the different pressures and understand the impacts of those on career and on research. And then I think also making sure that the focus is not just on, in this case, you're talking about two researchers. So, impact isn't about the number of publications and really the quantity, but what is the impact of that work, and what are the kind of creative contributions that different individuals can make. That's also a big part of the solution, I hope.
Thank you to Julia, who asked a very similar question based on that. And actually, coming from something you did mention in there, Claire has asked about opportunities for women to retrain later in life, or perhaps after having children or wanting a change in career. Again, this is related to the fact that simply women are expected to have time off to build a family and so on, and that gap in an otherwise exemplary chemistry career will have significant impact on the roles they're able to reach later on. Gloria, you talked a lot about how women in Nigeria are almost expected to leave their career behind and get married. What do you think we can do to help women, say after they've raised a family, get back into a chemistry career?
After they raise the family, coming back into the workforce is kind of slim, because on the employment level, it wants people that have experience, and most of the ladies have got no experience because after graduation they didn't have a job. Even where they now go to do a postgraduate studies, it is almost like they meet their midlife. It's not easy. I'm not having worked for 5-10 years to now go to teach in a secondary school or university or an oil company, except where they now establish cottage business industry or some sort of things. That's that problem. Once you have a break, it's not easy because you have fresh, younger ones that are still on the job market.
Again, it feels like we're falling back on gender stereotypes there, that women are expected to do crafty things and get into the sort of folk industry in that respect. That's one part of somebody's career. Phil asked in the registration process, he asked, where do we think the greatest focused intervention is needed to make the biggest difference? Would that be at school, at university level, early career, mid-career? Carol, what do you think about that? Where, if we only have a limited amount of time and resources, where would we be best to focus that intervention?
So I think that will depend on the country. I mean, just picking up on Gloria's point there about women returning to the workforce, the UK instituted a number of different kinds of fellowships. The Daphne Jackson Fellowship is one that does this. I know other learned societies offer these kinds of fellowships. And it's not just returning to a job, it's actually a funded research fellowship. You're attached to a mentor and you're brought back into the research community to really not just pick up where you left off, but actually to have that structured program and then to launch your career. And so I think there are some practical initiatives that we can do at that level. But you're right that actually, because we're falling back on gender stereotypes and we're saying, well, women are the carers and men are the breadwinners, I think we have to change that fundamentally. And I know that, you know, Gloria's described in Nigeria how very stark this is. And actually, I think back in the UK, we still have these old-fashioned attitudes ingrained but hidden. So my mother had to resign her position. She had to step out of the workforce when she was expecting me as her first child. It was not possible and not expected, not allowed for her to stay in the workforce. And so I'm the first child in my family to go to university, but suddenly within one generation, I'm now a professor, I'm a science diplomat, I'm a senior civil servant in government. So it shows that change is possible. But I think what really caused that change was a big societal shift that we still need to keep working on. But throughout my career, I have met senior men who have either not expected that I would want to continue with my career after I began a family, or actually disapproved that I was continuing to be successful in my career despite the fact that I had 2 children. And so, you know, we're still hitting those sorts of barriers. So I think, first of all, for me now as a senior woman in my field, and I don't see any senior women ahead of me, I don't have role models to look up to or mentors to go to who are senior women who've gone through, because there are so few. So it's quite a lonely landscape. So first of all, I think we have to support our senior women. We have to make sure that we are still there to help to drive the change that we want to see and that we want to be. And then I think in terms of targeting that focus, you know, we know that men want to take a bigger part in their family life. They want to be with their children. They don't want to have to live to this stereotype as the tough career guy who works 7 days a week and is driving his career forward. I think we now need to start talking about people and families and what does a good life lived look like? Because, you know, even if you choose to start a family, your children grow up, you know, your lives change. You become parents of older children. You become parents of adults and grandchildren. You may have, you know, elder parents who, you know, need your support. You may not have children, but you may have other things in your life that you want to bring in as a whole person. So I think we need to now start to think about who are we as people, who do we bring to work, and what do our organizations benefit from as bringing, you know, our whole selves to work is a phrase I hear often said. So I think there's the philosophical behind that. There's the being really frank and honest about the barriers and where are these people. You know, let's look at the data. We have the data, and then go right back to what's stopping people do this. And I think just, you know, my final comment really on the COVID inequality, and we're talking about women taking that load at home. We also have to look as employers about how we're driving the men in those couples or the other partner, and maybe the expectations on those men is to look fine, look as though they're coping, be strong in this pandemic, and not to say, actually, I'm going to work afternoons. Please don't email me in the morning because I'm doing my homeschooling while the schools are closed, and while my wife or my partner is, you know, is doing their research. So enabling everybody to do that. And, you know, whatever your family, we have all sorts of modern different kinds of families nowadays. How do we make a space for everybody to have that life and to deliver incredibly productively to their organization? So that was a really long answer for a short question.
No, it was a great answer. Clearly, I think you're targeting me a little bit with that one. As for those who don't know, I've very recently had my first child, and so I'm facing a lot of these questions, and my wife as well, who's currently on maternity leave, is facing a lot of these questions as to how we address the balance within our own household as well as within the wider society. That does lead me to a question from Penny, who said she's a young female chemist in an older, white, male-dominated industry. How do I get a seat at the table despite being less experienced and generally quite nervous in these environments that are dominated by men? Clearly, our panel today are examples of people who've not just got a seat at the table, but have absolutely made that seat their own and started to change the face of the table itself. Sarah, how can a young chemist get her voice heard, make sure that her opinions are taken into account, and become part of the change?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I mentioned a little bit having mentors and advisors, and I think that's a really it is intimidating, and for me, being on this panel is a intimidating process as well. And I think really reaching out and recognizing that other researchers, senior chemists, and others are interested in helping you and supporting you, and that is something that's very satisfying for a senior researcher, men and women. I think having reaching out directly and asking for advice and asking for support is a really good strategy to be able to then feel comfortable in those spaces and to be able to then build your own voice and be able to speak at a table of much more senior scientists. So I think really, I think you'd be surprised at the positive reaction that you would get from reaching out to individuals in your organization, in other organizations, and those who have careers that you're interested in, and building up those networks and getting advice on how to move forward. I think they're really building that network informally is a good approach. So that's my advice. And I think I've had really wonderful experiences by sort of taking a chance on that and reaching out, and have been able to make good connections that way.
So mentorship has come up a couple of times. There's been very recent research looking at diversity in mentorship that appears to show, and this probably won't be a surprise, that men are more likely to mentor men and white men are more likely to mentor white men. And so there's an intersectionality going on within the diversity story here. But how can we find the right mentor when there are so few people? So Carol, for example, there are very few people at your level in your career. You can't mentor every ambitious young female chemist, or in your case, physicist. How do we find or develop a network of mentors that include men who are happy to mentor women and women who are happy to mentor men and all of that, and actually sort of gain from one another's experience without being siloed into it's important that you mentor the same sort of person as you?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think there are two things that strike me here. There's reverse mentoring. So our seniors need to hear from diverse voices of junior scientists to understand what their life is like. And I think that organizations can systematize that. I know we do reverse mentoring in the FCDO, and we have a really strong mentor network. We also have sponsors, and I think sponsorship and mentorship is very different. So I've just had the honor of being appointed as an inclusion sponsor for one of our big FCDO networks, and it's the women network, but it's not just women who are in that network, so it's a gender focus, and it means that I can be a support and a critical friend to that network. I'm not mentoring 3,000 or 4,000 staff members, but I'm being their critical friend and also their voice of advocacy to my seniors above me, so you can scale that up. We also have some really interesting national initiatives in the UK. For example, the Leadership Foundation for Higher Education, which has now been renamed to Advance HE, has run a program for many years called the Aurora Leadership Program, and that's actually for women leaders or upcoming women leaders, so both on the academic and the professional services side, because we shouldn't forget that within our higher education sector, we have wonderful professional service colleagues and, you know, different kinds of biases there. And also all of the people who contribute to our science ecosystem, so our technicians. I know learned societies in the UK have been working a lot on career development for technicians across the country. They've been absolutely at the heart of the success of our response to COVID. And so it's not just your kind of alpha male white professor in the lab who is delivering this. They are just one actually small piece of the whole landscape. So I think organizations can systematize this. I mean, I would still say to young women scientists, do reach out to seniors. I do have a number of informal mentees from other organizations and from around the world who've dropped me an email and said, taking a chance that you might have half an hour for coffee. And I've said, actually, yes, I'll make the time. But you're right, we can't all mentor everybody on an individual basis, but we have to share that mentorship culture and get away from this siloed, I will pick up my favorites and sponsor you into the next position because you become my advocate in the future. We have to look diversely. And actually, if that's not happening, then organizations have a responsibility to break those silos up and systematize it across the board and measure and check that that's what's happening.
We have about 10 minutes left, and there are still some thank yous to do, but do keep your questions coming in and we'll see how many we can get through. Eileen asked, as a PhD student, how do I engage in hiring policies or influence diversification of senior staff at my workplace? This is a common theme in the sorts of webinars that we run looking at these topics, where you have people in a relatively junior position asking how they can influence up to try and help create the workplace that they believe is the fair and effective workplace that they want. Sarah, how would you recommend a PhD student, for example, manages to influence something as broad-ranging as hiring policy?
Well, I think the approach that Carol mentioned, that reverse mentorship and to bringing those new ideas is, I think, becoming more widely valued in organizations. For us, so in Canada, there is now really a commitment for institutions and requirements through a number of our programs. So, for example, the Canada Research Chairs, where universities do need to have in place plans around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there are these requirements, also to speak to Gloria's point, some requirements and expectations. And to be able to get to that, they will need the voices of students, broader, more diverse voices of students, of early career scientists. And we know that those groups are typically more diverse and that they become less so as we get into more senior roles. And so I think really that's, I hope that there's some recognition of the value of voices of PhD students and other, but I think being in touch with the administration and volunteering and to be able to speak to those points and to be able to bring new ideas will be increasingly valued in organizations. So I think some of it is having the courage to speak up and to reach out to individuals and to offer to be part of the conversation. And I hope that with some of these, we know the value of this, so that you would be engaged in that way. But I think, again, I mean, I mentioned it, but I think the reaching out to individuals can be a good approach to being able to find the best way to be involved in hiring processes. And, this is also something that's happening through, for example, human resources departments at universities, where they are also looking to have more diverse hiring practices. And so being able to find out who's involved in those and to may be the best way to get involved in those conversations.
Thank you, Carol. You've mentioned in the chat as well, reputation is key to this. And speaking of gender balance, my wife needs a very quick hand with my baby. Carol, tell us a bit about the role of reputation, building reputation in this, and I'll be back in just a second.
Yeah, absolutely. I think reputation is important. And, when you are junior in an organization, you have a really big role to play with raising your voice. I've certainly seen incredible challenge from our students in our universities and our student unions, and coming forward and actually really pushing senior management to look differently. I think there are some practical steps. You might have a look at your organisation and see where they're failing. So is it the language around the adverts? There are some great tools online where you can actually just cut and paste the language and it will tell you how gendered that language is. So there's those sorts of things. You can also look and see whether you might listen informally to find out whether managers or different parts of your organisation maybe are struggling to fill positions, or they have some challenges when they're filling those roles. But ultimately, that bigger reputational piece, you know, does an organisation look like a place that good people would want to go to, or actually are you not drawing in the best talent because you don't look diverse, you don't look modern? And I think the world really is changing, and so if you don't, I think the way to get to your senior management is to say, you know, there's going to be some reputational harm here, and there is going to be an impact on the business in all sorts of ways if we don't really drive change, and here are some practical ways to do that. The main thing to avoid, though, is that you should not be the token woman or the token junior woman on every hiring panel. You know, that's the last thing that you want, is that the workload lands on you. You give them the ball and you say, now you go run with it, and I'm watching because I'm the next generation, I'm coming through. I may be representative of your customers or your stakeholders. How do you look from outside? So I think that can be one really powerful instrument for change. But again, you know, it will depend in different countries. So, you know, Gloria might have a very different perspective there on things that might work depending on the cultural context and how you're able to raise your voice. You are in the workplace, so it's good that you're there already, and then you want to drive that change.
Well, Gloria, it's a good time to bring you in. How do you think early career researchers and PhD students and so on can get their voice heard?
Early career researchers and PhD students in Nigeria, they are not staff of the establishment, they are students. They can only speak or say something through their supervisor, because employment is an administrative thing that will mostly the senior colleagues in the establishment will be the ones that will take the decision based on laid down procedures. You cannot have a research fellow be in a panel where they're going to interview a new employer. No. For us in Nigeria, you have the deans, head of departments, and the senior professors in the panel. Not even some lower rank staff. So yes, their system abroad is quite different, except where someone is a research lab, where a supervisor or the leader in the team has a grant, which is rare, and wants to employ probably some technologists or whatever to support in that team, then the research fellow would go to him and say, this and that is what we want, or that we need somebody of this background. Our system of employment is quite different from the British or the Canadian or American system of employment.
So there are different hierarchies to be considered across different cultures as well. So it's certainly very true that what will work for one culture won't work for another. And in terms of things that we think will work, we have about 3 minutes left, and I do need to do some thanks. Let's see if we can get through this quite quickly. What is the one action that you think each of us can take to make a difference towards gender equality? Sarah, you are in the top left corner of my screen, so I will let you go first with this. Sarah, what's the one action we can take?
I think supporting girls to be able to think about all of the options open to them as they are growing up, and to really, I'm focused on science, so I think making sure that we're opening those doors at a very young age.
Thank you. Carol, you're next on my screen. What's your one action, your one take-home action?
So I, as a senior scientist, being a visible role model, and also using my advocacy and my seniority to change systematic biased systems and power structures.
Thank you very much. Gloria, what's the one thing that we can do today that will make a difference to the future?
I believe that collaboration and support for funding support for early career chemists will really make a change where they are properly counseled. Collaboration, support, and counseling at the right level will make a great change.
Thank you very much. And of course, as the launch of Commonwealth Chemistry, collaboration internationally is something that is really key to this organisation and key to today's event. So thank you very much to all of you. Sadly, we've run out of time. Thank you so much to the audience for so many fantastic questions and comments. We could easily have gone for another half hour, but we've already done 90 minutes, and 90 minutes sat in front of a webinar screen is probably enough for everybody. We should all stretch our legs. So thank you once again. Thank you earlier to Vicki Gardner and Baroness Scotland, who were our contributors inviting Commonwealth Chemistry. That's not the word I was looking for. And also thank you to Carol Mandel, Gloria Obuzo, and Sarah Overington for joining us to discuss gender balance and so on. Huge thank you to Steve Churchill and to Rachel Dance, who've been working incredibly hard throughout the entire presentation to make sure this is as accessible as possible to those who need BSL. Thank you so much for joining us. And also thank you to the people that we haven't seen in the background, Laura Reyes, Rachel Thompson, Sarah Thomas from the RSC, who've all been key in organising this and making it happen. And in my team, Chris Pink and Francis Addison, who've been running the technical side of it and keeping things running very, very smoothly. Now, just before we do sign off, there's a handful of resources that I would like to share with you. And there's a couple of things that the RSC can offer. And so there is our Grants for Carers scheme. This feeds back into a lot of what we were talking about earlier about the different roles that people play. If you are somebody who is in a chemistry career and yet you have a caring responsibility, then the Grants for Carers scheme covers care costs while attending any chemistry related opportunity, is open to all chemists in the UK and all RSC members internationally, and they will give you up to £1,000 a year to help cover the costs of care while you're meeting these responsibilities. You'll find the link for that on screen now, but also the wider issues. We have our bullying and harassment support line that the RSC kicked off, I believe it started last year. You'll find that at rsc.li/support. If you need somebody to talk to, if you need some help, then there are fantastic people willing to do absolutely everything they can to help make your situation better, and you'll find them at that line. And finally, it would be wrong to talk about the launch of Commonwealth Chemistry without telling you that coming up very soon will be the launch of the Commonwealth Chemistry website. You'll find that at www.commonwealthchemistry.org. So keep an eye out for that. It will be launching very soon, and there's a link in the chat for you. And that's it. Thank you again to Steve, to Rachel, to Vicki, to Baroness Scotland, to Carol, to Gloria, to Laura, Rachel, Sarah, Chris and Francis. There's an awful lot going on in the background. I'm Ben Valsler, Chemistry World's digital editor. It has been a pleasure and an honour to be with you today for the launch of Commonwealth Chemistry and to address how we can address gender equity in the chemical sciences across the Commonwealth. There will be more Chemistry World webinars, hopefully working with Commonwealth Chemistry as we go into the future, and do keep an eye out for the first big meeting, Commonwealth Chemistry, which is happening in May. You'll find details on that website once it's launched. Thank you again to everybody, and we'll be back with another Chemistry World webinar very soon.